Just okay. Thank you for coming. Everyone that just hopped on when I asked you to, thank you so much. We are so happy to have Margaret Kimberly here just this release week for Glen Ford's The Black Agenda. You can see mine, it's like
You're
this.
reading it, that's what you're,
but I'm reading
I
it.
should grab mine, except I can't find it. Oh, here we go.
And I want to remind everybody, this may be backwards, but Presidential is still available at Source Booksellers, and it's one of our favorite titles to hand sell you, whether it's election season or not. And it's Black America and the Presidents, and that's by Margaret Kimberly. And so I had a little sheet of paper here.
Sure.
I don't know where it is. But I just wanted to just remind everybody that you're New York based.
Yes.
A writer and an activist for peace and justice issues. And I do remember that Cornel West said this about you and Glen Ford, that you were one of the few truth tellers during the Obama era. So when I kind of read some of this book, I got that feeling still that is true. Right now, you are still with the Black Agenda Report.
I am. Since Glen passed away last July, I've become executive editor, and we are still publishing every week. We recently resumed Black Agenda Radio interviews, which can be heard on WBAI in New York and other stations across the country. So Black Agenda Report lives on.
Yes. And also there's a podcast.
Black Agenda Radio. Yes,
Radio.
It took us a while after Glen passed away. You know, transitions are difficult, but we did, starting last April 1st. No April Fools. Restarted our radio interviews on a variety of topics this week, and those appear on Friday on Black Agenda Report's website. You can see Black Agenda Radio. And please follow us on Facebook, please follow us on Twitter. And for example, this week we have a guest who's talking about her recent trip to Cuba and the significance of Cuba and Black people in Cuba. Another guest talking about the long history of Black Palestinian solidarity. And we have remarks given by Glen himself a couple of years ago on the subject of political prisoners and how the incarceration state itself is political. And, you know, that it can be said that all Black people who are incarcerated are political prisoners as a result of the creation of the mass incarceration state as a means of destroying the liberation movement. So those are just some examples of Black Agenda Radio. And Glen was an old hand, and he'd been on radio from the time he was a kid, literally. And so I'm stepping in with a lot less knowledge than he, but we are keeping on.
He also had knowledge in television.
Yes. Glen he had an interesting upbringing. He grew up partly in Jersey City, New Jersey, and part in Augusta, Georgia. His father in Georgia was a disc jockey on a radio station there, had the first dance show for Black kids in the early 60s. So Glen grew up in broadcasting. His father had him on the air as a kid. And but he was also in television. He produced a syndicated show, America's Black Forum, the first Black oriented political syndicated television show. And so he had a lot of experience in communications as a media person, but also as a very political person who was raised a red diaper baby, as we say, who was a socialist literally from the time he was born. I have my favorite Glen story. His mother was pregnant with him and attending the concerts in Poughkeepsie, New York, where Paul Robeson was attacked by a mob. He literally was a socialist from birth.
Wow.
Yeah, he was,
wow.
and he grew up in this interesting way. As I said, he grew up partly in the North in New Jersey, but also in the segregated South, and that marked him. So, and he was a Vietnam era veteran, and he was a Black Panther and a broadcaster. So he brought all of that, the totality of his life experience to his work as a writer and as an activist. He was a movement person, as he always said.
So these are the book is a collection of his writing. So it's not just 1 year, it's from different years. Did he intend this to be a book, or was it a collection? Was it being collected while he was alive or after?
Well, these were columns he wrote for Black Agenda Report over the years, and the 15 years it existed before he passed away. He had long spoken about putting his columns to, actually, sometimes we talked about everyone's columns going into a book, having an anthology of Black Agenda Report writings. And but someone reached out to him to publish a book. And so we were fortunate enough that he completed the manuscript, that he edited and gone through it and chosen all the articles and columns that he wanted about a year before he passed away.
Wow, we are lucky. But also, Detroit is lucky, because there are two pieces in here, the Siege of Detroit, and there's another one, and it's so clear-eyed about what was happening with us.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. Go ahead. So it was clear.
And so, I mean, so many of our local activists are just they would completely nod their head the entire time while reading this. And in our regular news, that's never how it was reported.
Oh, one of the reasons I'm so proud to be affiliated with Black Agenda Report is that thanks to Glen, thanks to his knowledge, thanks to his very sharp politics, we analyze stories the way nobody else did. So the story of Detroit, everywhere else was, well, they went broke, that's it. Nobody buys cars anymore. It was mismanaged and Black people were in charge. So obviously it's their fault. And that's it. That's the end of it. And they're going to fix everything. But Glen knew that the city of Detroit was being cheated, that the people of Detroit were being cheated, that the voters, and these are things that the corporate media don't tell you, just basic facts. Michigan voters said no. They did not like these emergency administrators that they were called?
Emergency managers.
Managers, thank you.
And it was all of the different Black towns in Michigan even.
Yes. And so it didn't matter that the voters so much for democracy, right? So people clearly said, no, we don't want this. And then what did they do? And then Republicans get in, and that's thanks to Democrats not caring that states were taken over by Republicans. And lo and behold, Detroit has an emergency manager. The banks who pushed the city into bankruptcy were paid first. Everyone else was paid last. The people who worked for the city of Detroit, and people don't realize they didn't get Social Security. All they had was their pension as city employees. Their pensions were cut. It was a terrible, terrible injustice. And it happened when Obama was president, like the Flint, speaking of poor Michigan, that he went to Flint and drank some water and said, maybe I got lead as a kid, but I'm fine, which was just disgraceful. But that's why I am so happy and so blessed to have known Glen and to be affiliated with Black Agenda Report, because we, as Cornel West was kind enough and generous enough to say about us, we did care about telling the truth. And speaking of water, I need.
Okay, so he also spoke up about Katrina, and No plan for Black cities. So Detroit was in that too.
Yep.
I mean, there's just so much of that. But then the book goes all the way, like closer to the end to COVID capitalism.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So
everything. It's like I wish. I mean, for so many reasons, I wish he was still here. Excuse me. I often say, what would Glen be saying about Ukraine? I mean, I knew some of what it would.
Yeah.
Before when the U.S. overthrew their government, but I remember when Katrina was happening and people were just lamenting this tragedy, this natural catastrophe, this human tragedy. And I remember talking to Glen, and he said they're going to make sure that New Orleans is not a majority Black city ever again. This is their opportunity to get Black people out and to make this the model for what they want, which is for Black people to be pushed out of the cities. And that did happen. I don't know if they've lost the majority, but for example, they established a charter school system. New Orleans does not have regular public schools. They're all charters. And I remember Obama's Secretary of Education saying, well, this is a good thing because they only have charter schools in New Orleans. So there, he talked about the right of return, this idea that people had to leave and then just go someplace else, and not that there was any obligation to fix their city, to rebuild it, to let people come back to their homes and their jobs and their families. So he was very clear. And while he was definitely a socialist, a Marxist, he was, as I used to say, I wrote in the foreword, a race man. Glen was always put Black people in the forefront of his thought, but as a socialist, as a committed socialist as well. And that's very clear in the book.
Yes. I can remember during the Katrina time, there was a couple, they drove from New Orleans to Detroit, and they were just like, now we have to live here. Which I'm glad we could make home for them, but I mean, I couldn't hear anything in their voice or anything in this, our small conversation, that they were just here for a bit and they're going to go back.
Yeah, I mean, it was terrible what was done to that, what was allowed to happen, that the infrastructure was allowed to deteriorate at a point where the city flooded that badly. But Katrina told us a lot about the direction the country was going in, where neoliberal austerity is what rules the day. And that was 2005, I believe, and we've only seen it get worse. And the last year of his life, the last year he was writing, he spoke a lot about austerity, which was not just about government spending, but about a system dedicated to making people's lives miserable, to make sure they're exploited and they don't know how not to be exploited, and that they're silent about their exploitation. And you could see that in Detroit. You could see it in New Orleans. Now we see it for the whole country, where they just, I'm sure it was phony. First they said $33 billion for Ukraine, then it turned into 40 billion. I'm sure it was 40 billion all along. They just tried to soften us up with the lower number. But the little bit of help people got last year with the COVID crisis, the child tax credit gone. Extra unemployment. They allowed some states to take it from people. And then it was, Build Back Better, sorry, Mansion and Cinema, nothing we can do. And that we're supposed to be okay with this, that we're not supposed to say anything, about this ill-conceived effort to try to weaken Russia, which is actually impoverishing the whole world and taking our money to do it. Those are the things. I know Glen would have a lot to say about it, but what happened in Detroit and what happened in New Orleans, we can see the pattern now: increased gentrification, loss of living wage work, all of any protections, the weakening of the little bit of safety net we have. All of those are things that Glen paid attention to.
Definitely. I guess so we're at 6:30. So if you are in the Zoom and you have questions, go ahead and put it in the Q&A. Go ahead and put it in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to it. I was waiting for May 10th for this book to come out, because and thanks to OR Press, there were no pre-release, like little copies. So I had to hurry up and read it. So I'm glad this is happening on the 12th. We did get them a little bit earlier, so I was able to kind of go through it. But I just want to remind everybody that on the Black Agenda report, there's so much news, Ukraine, NATO, all of these perspectives, and you won't find them really in any other publication.
I'm pleased to say, and I'm being accurate, it's not hyperbole or exaggeration. We are the only group of people publishing regularly from a Black leftist perspective, from a radical perspective. So every Wednesday, blackagendareport.com. So this week, we have history from Black Agenda Review, a group of scholars who present very fascinating history. We have a contributor who's been in Ethiopia and Eritrea. We have a poet in residence. I wrote about Roe v. Wade this week and how it is the fault of the Democratic Party, who could have protected abortion rights, that those rights are now in danger. So, and we also reprint articles. If we think something is good, we see it somewhere else, we reprint it. We acknowledge that it's a reprint. So we have someone writing about the fact that this effort to sanction Russia is impoverishing the global South, African countries in particular. So if you sanction Russian oil, and cut the supply of oil, the price of oil goes up all over the world. And there are countries that can't afford fuel. People who, there's going to be a food shortage, if you're going to sanction Russian wheat, well, there's a food shortage all over the world. So we touch on so many different issues. We have a contributor who's in Ukraine right now.
Wow.
Yeah. So we don't play around. So we have a story about the upcoming Summit of the Americas, as they're calling it, but the United States doesn't want to invite Cuba, Nicaragua, or Venezuela, which means it's the Summit of the Americas unless it's a country the US doesn't like. So I guess they ought to change the name. So it's a wide variety of issues, and you can see it every week, blackagendareport.com.
Thank you so much. We have about 10 minutes.
Yes, we do. Sorry it's so short. I want people to know this was my fault. The scheduling snafu was on me, but anyway.
No. So we're just so happy that you were able to join us during the release week. So this book can get attention, just more attention than it would at any other time, like any other, releases. And we also want to bring attention to one of our favorite books, Presidential.
And I was able to, it was right before the shutdown. I was at the store I remember the date because it's one of my brother's birthday, March 7th, and was able to promote the book. You had a great crowd.
Yes.
It was I'd never been to Detroit before. It was a lot of fun. So I tell everybody to go to Source Booksellers, or you can go online, right? And order from you
now,
guys.
Thanks to the pandemic.
God, it's I know it's been a difficult 2 years for everybody, but I just wanted to put that in. So thank you so much for that great event you had for me. It was a lot of fun. I would love to come back. I don't know when I'm going to write another book. I want to have that experience again. So whatever. You don't have
to write another one to come back.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, you touched on a lot of things. Cornel West, he's God bless him, is very, very generous man, very down to earth. Another race man, another brilliant man, who's kind enough to give us blurbs for our books. The very first chapter I love was called No More American Thanksgivings. And
Okay.
Glen talks about the history of the settler state and how it began and the genocide of indigenous people. It was brilliant stuff. He wrote it 20 years ago. He touches on everything that happened. Black Agenda Report started in 2006, but we were at Black Commentator before, so some of these are Black Commentator articles for a lot about Iraq. Of course, we just talked about Katrina. We talked about Detroit. He always spoke about the political trap where Black people are trapped in the Democratic Party or feel trapped in the Democratic Party and don't know that we can and should be independent, and that is when we thrive. Excuse me. Policy in Africa. A lot of, if people are Obama fans, you better get your smelling salts before you read this book, because we didn't change our politics because there was a Black president. So,
just the one on Libya.
Yes,
the chapter
Libya. I'm glad you brought that up. Nobody else talked about, was another issue like Detroit, like New Orleans. No one talked about the crime that was committed against the nation of Libya in 2011, carried out by Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. It destroyed the Libyan state, killed the president. Libya still does not have a true government, a coherent state. It was a race war against African migrants and darker skinned Libyans. And it was a proxy war, the US using jihadists as proxies. And after they destroyed Libya, they tried to use the same people to destroy Syria, which fortunately got help. And while the US is still punishing with sanctions, is still a state that exists that the US tried to destroy. So that's the history I'm trying to uphold. And I often, I can't, those are big shoes to fill. I don't have Glen's political history, although I learned a lot from him. But every issue, everything that has happened in the past 20 years, we've covered in Black Agenda Report. Electoral politics in the US, foreign policy, domestic policy, the mass incarceration. I first saw the words mass incarceration when Glen used them in an article. So I'm very, very proud of the work that we've done, and knowing Glen, he had such an influence, I'd say outside of my family, a bigger influence on my life than anybody else.
I love it.
I'm very happy to have known him. I wouldn't have become a published author or any of the things I've done since that time if I had not known Glen.
And I just want to remind everybody that with this with this event, we will have a link to Nia Ford's, I guess, writing, like her writing about Glen Ford. Let me see if I can.
You mean her tribute to her dad? Yes.
Tribute, yeah.
Yeah, we had a tribute issue. Glen passed on July 28th. We held it together to have a tribute issue right away. And his family, friends, admirers, we all came together. We had a beautiful memorial service held in a chapel at Riverside Church over the summer, which was it was still on YouTube. And I urge people to, it was still some social distancing. People couldn't travel, but we had people record some of their remembrances, and it was really lovely. It was an excellent tribute to him. And also the New York Times had this amazing obituary. When they got in touch with us, I was a little leery. I was like, well, without politics, what are they going to say about Glen? They had this great obituary. It was beautiful. It was all true. So I was really shocked that they acknowledged his work. I'm pleasantly surprised, I have to say, very pleasantly surprised.
All right, so we can't take any more questions. Let me see.
I don't know if you want me to take that question. I'm happy to.
I guess so.
Well, it's okay. The person is obviously against abortion. Asking about the killing of Black babies, and we believe. Glenn and I talked about it once, and we believe that abortion being legal was democracy, and at its very essence, that if one group of people should have control over their own bodies, it should be Black women, given our history. And I know, and he knew, that many people oppose abortion, but that's not a reason for it to be illegal for everyone. We live in a society where children are not really valued. Black people are certainly not really valued, but we are not in favor of anything that would constrain the ability of Black people to have agency over their lives. So yes, we are, people say pro-choice, you could say pro-abortion, but abortion should be legal. That is a political stance that we have always had.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And I think that was a very interesting question. Thank you so much for taking it. And thank you so much. I know that you're busy because there's so much news. I know every minute that you have is taken. So thank you. It is precious that you took this time with us to talk about Glen, to talk about the book a little bit during its release week, and also help us know how to get the information, Wednesdays.
Wednesday.
And I did put in the chat, you can save it really quickly. I did put the article by Nia Ford, Glen's daughter, a link to it. And I put the website for the Black Agenda Report. So you can save that real quick if you'd like. And so just to let everyone know that the Black Agenda Report and Presidential are available at Source Booksellers, online and in the store. So thank you so much. I'm using up to my last second.
That's fine. I want to end, and I thank you for your indulgence and your patience with me, but I'm going to end the way Glen would always end if he was speaking, and I will say, power to the people.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.